Hi there, my name is Chris Noring. I work for Microsoft. In this video about Vue and forms, we're going to talk about forms, what they are, and how we can use them to collect data and ultimately to send it towards a backend. First things first, forms. What are those? Well, in a previous video, you might have seen how we used an input element to collect data from the user as they were typing inside of a UI. What is a form then? Why do I need a form? Well, a form is a logical grouping. So imagine, for example, that you have a shipping order. Now, a shipping order consists of probably many input elements. It contains maybe the person you're going to send the item to, maybe the address, maybe the city, maybe shipping costs, and so on. A lot of data that actually belongs together can be logically grouped, because that's what a form is. You might also have an order, and everything related to an order information should be within that form. Ultimately, what you want to send all related data at the same time, but you also want to subject it to some kind of validation process. Now, validation is something we're going to cover in the next video about forms. For now, we're going to see how we can set up a form and how we can add Vue.js to it. Looking here at this UI, we see that we have a form. We have a form tag, and we also have an input element, so it enables us to capture some kind of name. And lastly, we have a button element, and the button element enables us to submit the information. And submitting the information means that we send the information somewhere when the user presses this button. The default behavior is to send it to the same page unless I say else. I can actually specify an address to send it to if I don't want to send it to the same page. So we have a form element, we have an input element. Also note how this input element has this required attribute, which essentially communicates to the form and say, hey, this value can't be sent unless there is at least one character inside of this element. So let's see how this looks already in a browser. What you're looking at here is an input field with a submit button. So it's only two elements, but the form is already working for you. If I press submit here, I can see that the browser itself is actually filling in this and say, please fill in this field. And this is because we're using this required attribute. So we see that the form is already working for us and won't allow us to submit this piece of information unless we fulfill this. Let's say that we input some data, whatever data, and hit submit. At this point, the form is being submitted, and what you saw here was a page rendering. So the whole information is being sent to the page, and the page is reloading. This reloading behavior is something that we need to deal with because we don't want any reloads in SPA applications. Now at this point, we want some kind of event set up. So we want to submit information, and we want to associate this to some kind of handler. Remember how this @ is the same thing as to bind towards an event. So we want the submit event to be associated with a handler. So you might call this handle submit. Once we have that, we can ensure that there is a function on the Vue.js side of things. We can go into index.js. So we will add something called methods. So what we have right now is an event handler called handle submit, and we added that. And let's have a look at this form being submitted. So we're going to head back to the browser. Okay, so before we head to the browser, we add this line that says prevent default. The reason for adding that is that we don't want the whole page to be refreshed. We don't want the page to reload. So we're adding this behavior to stop that. Okay, so once inside of our browser now, we see that there's not much difference, but we have added Vue.js code, and let's see exactly how that would work. We hit submit, and we see that still the browser is telling us, hey, you need to fill in this field because of the required attribute. What we can do is to fill in some piece of data like so, and then we hit submit. Now at this point, we see that the console logged out statement is being outputted like so, form submitted. And looking at our Vue.js code, we see that the console log is actually the row being executed, and this is because there's a valid form. We are adding valid data from the form. We also see that this prevent default is working for us. We can do this better. We don't need this line because there is a shorthand in Vue that we could be using. So by adding this prevent here, this will actually replace a code line for us. So we no longer need this one. We can just save this and refresh the browser, and we can see that this still works. We see it acts like so. The browser is telling us that something is not valid. We add a piece of data, we hit submit, and we see the console log says form submitted, and we also see that we don't need this prevent default code. So, okay, let's have a look at how we can capture the data from the form in two different ways. First off, we use the V model. We've added the V model directive, and we have it point to a name property. The name property needs to exist, so we need to go inside of our code to ensure that the returned object from data here contains a name property. Secondly, we can add an alternate method, which is to add a name attribute and having it have a name that you can refer to later in code. In this case, we're calling it name, but we could easily be calling it address, for example. The point is that this property should be something that you understand what it means, so when you refer to it. Let's have a look at the submit method, because we've added 2 rows, and I'm showing you how you can access this submitted values in 2 ways. One via the name property, name.value, and the target here points to the form element. Second way of doing things is through this.name, and this is because we're adding the V model syntax and because this name property exists. So let's have a look at how this looks in the browser. Looking in the browser, we can see that I've already pressed the submit button to make this a bit simpler, and I just wanted to show you how this same data that we inputted here in input field is available in 2 different places. So either via eTarget, E is the name of the event, target is the form, name is the input element, and value points to data, which is exactly what we typed. And then we have this .name, which points to the same piece of data, but it's being accessed through the V model syntax. And that concludes this video. In this video, I wanted to show you that forms are being used as logical groupings. When you have one or many input elements that kind of belongs together, like a shipping address or maybe an order, it makes sense to use a form. And a form also plays nicely with various attributes like required that you can add to input elements, and you can use that to show validation messages if there's something with the form that's not quite correct. In our next video on forms, I'll show you how to set up some basic validation. So this time around, we're kind of using the browser functionality, but you can take control of this process yourself.